The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath by H.P. Lovecraft. Chapter 7. About midday, the ghouls and nightgauns prepared for flight, each ghoul selecting a suitable pair of horned steeds to bear him. Carter was placed well up toward the head of the column beside Pickman, and in front of the whole a double line of riderless nightgauns was provided as a vanguard. At a brisk meep from Pickman, the whole shocking army rose in a nightmare cloud above the broken columns and crumbling sphinxes of primordial Sarkomand, higher and higher, till even the great basalt cliff behind the town was cleared, and the cold, sterile tableland of Lang's outskirts laid open to sight. Still higher flew the black host, till even this tableland grew small beneath them, and as they worked northward, over the wind-swept plateau of horror, Carter saw once again with a shudder the circle of crude monoliths and the squat, windowless building, which he knew held that frightful silken-masked blasphemy from whose clutches he had so narrowly escaped. This time no descent was made as the army swept, bat-like, over the sterile landscape, passing the feeble fires of the unwholesome stone villages at a great altitude, and pausing not at all to mark the morbid twistings of the hooved, horned, almost humans that dance and pipe eternally therein. Once they saw a shantak bird flying low over the plain, but when it saw them, it screamed noxiously and flapped off to the north in grotesque panic. At dusk, they reached the jagged gray peaks that formed the barrier of Inganok, and hovered about those strange caves near the summits where Carter recalled as so frightful to the Shantaks. At the insistent meeping of the ghoulish leaders, there issued forth from each lofty burrow a stream of horned black flyers, with which the ghouls and nightgauns of the party conferred at length by means of ugly gestures. It soon became clear that the best course would be that over the cold waste north of Inganok, for Leng's northward reaches are full of unseen pitfalls that even the nightgauns dislike, abysmal influences centering in certain white hemispherical buildings on curious knolls, which common folklore associates unpleasantly with the other gods and their crawling chaos, Nyarlathotep. Of Kadath, the flutterers of the peaks knew almost nothing, save that there must be some mighty marvel toward the north, over which the Shantaks and the carven mountains stand guard. They hinted at rumored abnormalities of proportion in those trackless leagues beyond, and recalled vague whispers of a realm where night broods eternally, but of definite data they had nothing to give. So Carter and his party thanked them kindly, and crossing the topmost granite pinnacles to the skies of Inganok, dropped below the level of the phosphorescent night clouds, and held in the distance those terrible squatting gargoyles that were mountains, till some titan hand carved fright into their virgin rock. There they squatted, in a hellish half-circle, their legs on the desert sand and their mitres piercing the luminous clouds, sinister, wolf-like, and double-headed, with faces of fury and right hands raised, dully and malignly watching the rim of man's world, and guarding with horror the reaches of a cold northern world that is not man's. From their hideous laps rose evil Shantaks of elephantine bulk, but these all fled with insane titters as the vanguard of nightgauns was sighted in the misty sky. Northward above those gargoyle mountains the army flew, and over leagues of dim desert where never a landmark rose, less and less luminous grew the clouds, till at length Carter could see only blackness around him. But never did the winged steeds falter, bred as they were in earth's blackest crypts, and seeing not with any eyes, but with the whole dank surface of their slippery forms. On and on they flew, past winds of dubious scent and sounds of dubious import, ever in thickest darkness, and covering such prodigious spaces that Carter wondered whether or not they could still be within Earth's dreamland. Then, suddenly, the clouds thinned, and the stars shone spectrally above. All below was still black, but those pallid beacons in the night seemed alive, with a meaning and directiveness they had never possessed elsewhere. It was not the figures of the constellations were different, but that the same familiar shapes now revealed a significance they had formerly failed to make plain. Everything focused toward the north. Every curve and asterism of the glittering sky became part of a vast design whose function was to hurry first the eye and then the whole observer onward to some secret and terrible goal of convergence beyond the frozen waste that stretched endlessly ahead. Carter looked toward the east, where the great ridge of barrier peaks had towered along all the length of Inganoc, and saw against the stars a jagged silhouette which told of its continued presence. It was more broken now, with yawning clefts and fantastically erratic pinnacles, and Carter studied closely the suggestive turns and inclinations of that grotesque outline, which seemed to share with the stars some subtle northward urge. They were flying past at a tremendous speed, so that the watcher had to strain hard to catch details when all at once he beheld just above the line of the topmost peaks a dark and moving object against the stars, whose course exactly paralleled that of his own bizarre party. The ghouls had likewise glimpsed it, for he heard their low glibbering all about him, and for a moment he fancied the object was a gigantic shantak of a size vastly greater than that of the average specimen. Soon, however, he saw that this theory would not hold, for the shape of the thing above the mountains was not that of any hippocephalic bird. Its outline against the stars, necessarily vague as it was, resembled rather some huge mitered head, or pair of heads, infinitely magnified, and its rapid bobbing flight through the sky seemed most peculiarly a wingless one. Carter could not tell which side of the mountains it was on, but soon perceived that he had parts below the parts he had first seen, since it blotted out all the stars in places where the ridge was deeply cleft. Then came a wide gap in the range, where the hideous reaches of transmontane Leng were joined to the cold waste on this side by a low pass through which the stars shone wanly. Carter watched this gap with intense care, knowing he might see outlined against the sky beyond it lower parts of the vast thing that flew undulantly above the pinnacles. The object had now floated ahead a trifle, and every eye of the party was fixed on the rift, where it would presently appear in full-length silhouette. Gradually, the huge thing above the peaks neared the gap, slightly slackening its speed as if conscious of having outdistanced the ghoulish army. For another minute, suspense was keen, and then the brief instant of full silhouette and revelation came, bringing to the lips of the ghouls an odd and half-choked meep of cosmic fear, and to the soul of the traveler a chill that has never wholly left it. For the mammoth bobbing shape that overstopped the ridge was only a head, a mitered double head, and below it, in terrible vastness, loped the frightful swollen body that bore it, the high mountain monstrosity that walked in stealth and silence, the hyena-like distortion of a giant anthropoid shape that trotted blackly against the sky, its repulsive pair of cone-capped heads reaching halfway to the zenith. Carter did not lose consciousness or even scream aloud, for he was an old dreamer, but he looked behind him in horror and shuddered when he saw that there were other monstrous heads, silhouetted above the level of the peaks, bobbing along stealthily after the first one, and straight in the rear were three of the mighty mountain shapes seen full against the southern stars, tiptoeing wolf-like and lumberingly, their tall miters nodding thousands of feet in the air. The carven mountains then had not stayed squatting in that rigid semicircle north of Inganoc, with right hands uplifted. They had duties to perform and were not remiss, but it was horrible that they never spoke and never even made a sound in walking. Meanwhile, the ghoul that was Pickman had glibbered an order to the night gaunts, and the whole army soared higher into the air, Up toward the stars the grotesque column shot, till nothing stood out any longer against the sky, neither the grey granite ridge that was still, nor the carven and mitred mountains that walked. All was blackness beneath, as the fluttering legions surged northward amidst rushing winds and invisible laughter in the ether, and never a Shantak or less mentionable entity rose from the haunted wastes to pursue them. The farther they went, the faster they flew, till soon their dizzying speed seemed to pass that of a rifle ball and approach that of a planet in its orbit. Carter wondered how with such speed the earth could still stretch beneath them, but knew that in the land of dream, dimensions have strange properties, that they were in a realm of eternal night. He felt certain, and he fancied that the constellations overhead had subtly emphasized their northward focus, gathering themselves up, as it were, to cast the flying army into the void of the boreal pole, as the folds of a bag are gathered up to cast out the last bits of substance therein. Then he noticed with terror that the wings of the night gauns were not flapping any more. The horned and faceless steeds had folded their membranous appendages and were resting quite passive in the chaos of wind that whirled and chuckled as it bore them on. A force not of earth had seized on the army, and ghouls and night gaunts alike were powerless before a current which pulled madly and relentlessly into the north, whence no mortal had ever returned. At length, a lone, pallid light was seen on the skyline ahead, thereafter rising steadily as they approached and having beneath it a black mass that blotted out the stars. Carter saw that it must be some beacon on a mountain, for only a mountain could rise so vast as seen from so prodigious a height in the air. Higher and higher rose the light and the blackness beneath it, till half the northern sky was obscured by the rugged conical mass. Lofty as the army was, that pale and sinister beacon rose above it, towering monstrous over all peaks and concernments of earth, and tasting the atomless ether where the cryptical moon and the mad planets reel. No mountain known of man was that which loomed before them. The high clouds far below were but a fringe for its foothills. The gasping dizziness of topmost air was but a girdle for its loins. Scornful and spectral climbed that bridge betwixt earth and heaven, black in eternal night and crowned with a patient of unknown stars, whose awful and significant outline grew every moment clearer. Ghouls meeped in wonder as they saw it, and Carter shivered in fear lest all the hurtling army be dashed to pieces on the unyielding onyx of that cyclopean cliff. Higher and higher rose the light, till it mingled with the loftiest orbs of the zenith and winked down at the flyers with lurid mockery. All the north beneath it was blackness now, dread, stony blackness, from infinite depths to infinite heights. And with only that pale, winking beacon perched unreachably at the top of all vision. Carter studied the light more closely and saw at last what lines its inky background made against the stars. There were towers on that Titan mountain top, horrible dome towers in noxious and incalculable tiers and clusters beyond any dreamable workmanship of man, battlements and terraces of wonder and menace, all limned, tiny and black and distant against the starry patient that glowed malevolently at the uppermost rim of sight. Capping that most measureless of mountains was a castle beyond all mortal thought, and in it glowed the demon light. Then Randolph Carter knew that his quest was done, and that he saw above him the goal of all forbidden steps and audacious visions, the fabulous, the incredible home of the great ones, atop unknown Kadath. Even as he realized this thing, Carter noticed a change in the course of the helplessly wind-sucked party. They were rising abruptly now, and it was plain that the focus of their flight was the onyx castle where the pale light shone. So close was the great black mountain that its sides sped by them dizzily as they shot upward, and in the darkness they could discern nothing upon it. Vaster and vaster loomed the tenebrous towers of the knighted castle above, and Carter could see that it was well nigh blasphemous in its immensity. Well might its stones have been quarried by nameless workmen in that horrible gulf rent out of the rock, in the hill, past north of Inganoch. For such was its size that a man on its threshold stood even as an ant on the steps of earth's loftiest fortress. The beshunt of unknown stars above the myriad domed turrets glowed with a sallow, sickly flare, so that a kind of twilight hung about the murky walls of the slippery onyx. The pallid beacon was now seen to be a single shining window high up in one of the loftiest towers, and as the helpless army neared the top of the mountain, Carter thought he detected unpleasant shadows flitting across the feebly luminous expanse. It was a strangely arched window of a design wholly alien to earth. The solid rock now gave place to the giant foundations of the monstrous castle, and it seemed that the speed of the party was somewhat abated. Vast walls shot up, and there was a glimpse of a great gate through which the voyagers were swept. All was night in the tightened courtyard, and then came the deeper blackness of inmost things as a huge arched portal engulfed the column. Vortices of cold wind surged dankly through sightless labyrinths of onyx, and Carter could never tell what cyclopean stairs and corridors lay silent along the route of his endless aerial twisting. Always upward led the terrible plunge in darkness, and never a sound, touch, or glimpse broke the dense pall of mystery. Large as the army of ghouls and nightgaunts was, it was lost in the prodigious voids of that more than earthly castle, and when at last there suddenly dawned around him the lurid light of that single tower room, whose lofty window had served as a beacon, it took Carter long to discern the far walls and high, distant ceiling, and to realize that he was indeed not again in the boundless air outside. Randolph Carter had hoped to come into the throne room of the Great Ones with poise and dignity, flanked and followed by impressive lines of ghouls in ceremonial order, and offering his prayer as a free and potent master among dreamers. He had known that the Great Ones themselves are not beyond a mortal's power to cope with, and had trusted to luck that the other gods and their crawling chaos Nyarlathotep would not happen to come to their aid at the crucial moment, as they had so often done before when men sought out Earth's gods in their home or on their mountains. And with his hideous escort he had half hoped, to defy even the other gods if need were. Knowing as he did that the ghouls have no masters, and that the Nightgaunts own not Nyarlathotep, but only archaic Nodens for their lord. But now he saw that the supernal Kadath, in its cold waste, is indeed girt with dark wonders and nameless sentinels, and that the other gods are of a surety vigilant in guarding the mild, feeble gods of earth. Void as they are of lordship over ghouls and nightgaunts, the mindless, shapeless blasphemies of outer space can yet control them when they must, so that it was not in state as a free and potent master of dreamers that Randolph Carter came into the Great One's throne room with his ghouls, swept and herded by nightmare tempests from the stars, and dogged by unseen horrors of the northern waste. All that army floated captive and helpless in the lurid light, dropping numbly to the onyx floor when by some voiceless order the winds of fright dissolved. Before no golden days had Randolph Carter come, nor was there any august circle of crowned and haloed beings with narrow eyes, long lobed ears, thin nose, and pointed chin, whose kinship to the carven face on Nagronic might stamp them as those to whom a dreamer might pray. Save for that one tower room, the onyx castle atop Kadath was dark, and the masters were not there. Carter had come to unknown Kadath in the cold waste, but he had not found the gods. Yet still the lurid light glowed in that one tower room, whose size was so little less than that of all outdoors, and whose distant walls and roof were so nearly lost to sight in thin curling mists. Earth's gods were not there, it was true, but of subtler and less visible presences there could be no lack. Where the mild gods are absent, the other gods are not unrepresented. And certainly the onyx castle of castles was far from tenantless. In what outrageous forms or form terror would next reveal itself, Carter could by no means imagine. He felt that his visit had been expected and wondered how close a watch had all along been kept upon him by the crawling chaos Nyarlathotep. It is Nyarlathotep, horror of infinite shapes and dread soul and messenger of the other gods, that the fungus moon beasts serve, and Carter thought of the black galley that had vanished when the tide of battle turned against the toad-like abnormalities on the jagged rock in the sea. Reflecting upon these things, he was staggering to his feet in the midst of his nightmare company, when there rang without warning through that pale, litten, and limitless chamber the hideous blast of a demon trumpet. 3 times pealed that frightful brazen scream, and when the echoes of the third blast had died chucklingly away, Randolph Carter saw he was alone. Whither, why, and how the ghouls and night-gaunts had been snatched from sight was not for him to divine. He knew only that he was suddenly alone, and that whatever unseen powers lurked mockingly around him were no powers of earth's friendly dreamland. Presently, from the chamber's uttermost reaches, a new sound came. This, too, was a rhythmic trumpeting, but of a kind far removed from the 3 raucous blasts which had dissolved his grisly cohorts. In this low fanfare echoed all the wonder and melody of ethereal dream, exotic vistas of unimagined loveliness floating from each strange chord and subtly alien cadence. Odors of incense came to match the golden notes, and overhead a great light dawned, its colors changing in cycles unknown to Earth's spectrum, and following the song of the trumpet in weird, symphonic harmonies, touches flared in the distance, and the beat of drums throbbed nearer amidst waves of tense expectancy. Out of the thinning mists and the cloud of strange incense filed twin columns of giant black slaves with loincloths of iridescent silk. Upon their heads were strapped vast, helmet-like torches of glittering metal, from which the fragrance of obscure balsams spread in fumous spirals. In their right hands were crystal wands whose tips were carven into leering chimeras, while their left hands grasped long, thin silver trumpets, which they blew in turn. Armlets and anklets of gold they had, and between each pair of anklets stretched a golden chain that held its wearer to a sober gait. That they were true black men of Earth's dreamland was at once apparent, but it seemed less likely that their rites and costumes were wholly things of our Earth. 10 feet from Carter the columns stopped, and as they did, so each trumpet flew abruptly to its bearer's thick lips. Wild and ecstatic was the blast that followed, and wilder still the cry that chorused just after, from dark throats somehow made shrill by strange artifice. Then, down the wide lane betwixt the 2 columns, a lone figure strode, a tall, slim figure, with the face young of an antique pharaoh, gay with prismatic robes and crowned with a golden pashent that glowed with inherent light. Close up to Carter strode that regal figure, whose proud carriage and swart features had in them the fascination of a dark god or fallen archangel, and around those eyes there lurked the languid sparkle of capricious humor. It spoke, and in its mellow tones there rippled the mild music of Lethean streams. "Randolph Carter," said the voice, "you have come to see the great ones, whom it is unlawful for men to watch. Watchers have spoken of this thing, and the other gods have grunted as they rolled and tumbled mindlessly to the sound of thin flutes in the black ultimate void, where broods the demon sultan, whose name no lips dare speak aloud. When Barzai the Wise climbed Hatheg Kla to see the great ones dance and howl above the clouds in the moonlight, he never returned. The other gods were there, and they did what was expected. Zenig of Afarat sought to reach unknown Kadath in the cold waste, and his skull is now set in a ring on the little finger of one whom I need not name, but you Randolph Carter, have braved all things of earth's dreamland, and burn still with the flame of quest. You came not as one curious, but as one seeking his due. Nor have you failed ever in reverence toward the mild gods of earth. Yet have these gods kept you from the marvelous sunset city of your dreams, unholy through their own covetousness. For verily they crave the weird loveliness of that which your fancy had fashioned, and vowed that henceforth no other spot should be their abode. They are gone from their castle on unknown Kadath to dwell in your marvelous city. All through its palaces of veined marble they revel by day, and when the sun sets, they go out in the perfumed gardens and watch the golden glory on temples and colonnades, arched bridges and silver-basined fountains, and wide streets with blossom-laden urns and ivory statues in gleaming rows. And when night comes, they climb tall terraces in the dew, and sit on carved benches of porphyry, scanning the stars, or lean over pale balustrades to gaze at the town's steep northward slopes, where one by one the little windows in old peaked gables shine softly out with the calm yellow light of homely candles. The gods loved your marvelous city, and walk no more in the way of the gods. They have forgotten the high places of earth and the mountains that knew their youth. The earth has no longer any gods that are gods, and only the other ones from outer space hold sway on unremembered Kadath. Far away in a valley of your own childhood, Randolph Carter, play the heedless great ones. You have dreamed too well, O wise arch-dreamer, for you have drawn dreams' gods away from the world of all men's visions to that which is wholly yours, having builded out of your boyhood's small fancies a city more lovely than all the phantoms that have gone before. It is not well that the earth gods leave their thrones for the spider to spin on, and their realm for the others to sway in the dark manner of others. Fain would the powers from outside bring chaos and horror to you, Randolph Carter, who are the cause of their upsetting, but that they know it is by you alone that the gods may be sent back to their world. In that half-waking dreamland which is yours, no power of uttermost night may pursue, and only you can send the selfish great ones gently out of your marvelous sunset city back through the northern twilight to their wonted place atop unknown Kadath in the cold waste. So, Randolph Carter, in the name of the other gods, I spare you and charge you to serve my will. I charge you to seek that sunset city which is yours, and to send thence the drowsy truant gods, for whom the dream world waits. Not hard to find is that roseal fever of the gods, that fanfare of supernal trumpets and clash of immortal cymbals, that mystery whose place and meaning have haunted you through the halls of waking and the gulfs of dreaming, and tormented you with hints of vanished memory and the pain of lost things awesome and momentous. Not hard to find is that symbol and relic of your days of wonder, for truly it is but the stable and eternal gem wherein all that wonder sparkles crystallized to light your evening path. Behold, it is not over unknown seas, but back over well-known years that your quest must go, back to the bright strange things of infancy and the quick sun-drenched glimpses of magic that old scenes brought to wide young eyes. For you know that your golden marble city of wonder is only the sum of what you have seen and loved in youth. It is the glory of Boston's hillside roofs and western windows aflame with sunset, of the flower-fragrant common and the great dome on the hill, and the tangle of gables and chimneys in the violet valley where the many-bridged Charles flows drowsily. These things you saw, Randolph Carter, when your nurse first wheeled you out into the springtime, and they will be the last things you will ever see with eyes of memory and of love. And there is antique Salem with its brooding years, and spectral Marblehead scaling its rocky precipices into past centuries, and the glory of Salem's towers and spires, seen afar from Marblehead's pastures across the harbor against the setting sun. There is Providence, quaint and lordly on its 7 hills, over the blue harbour with terraces of green, leading up to steeples and citadels of living antiquity, and Newport, climbing wraith-like from its dreaming breakwater. Arkham is there, with its moss-grown gambrel roofs, and the rocky rolling meadows behind it, and antediluvian Kingsport, hoary with stacked chimneys and deserted quays and overhanging gables, and the marble of high cliffs, and the milky misted ocean with tolling buoys beyond, cool vales in Concord, cobbled lanes in Portsmouth, twilight bends of rustic New Hampshire roads where giant elms half hide white farmhouse walls and creaking well sweeps, Gloucester's salt wharves and Truro windy willows, vistas of distant steepled towns, and hills beyond hills along the north shore, hushed stony slopes and low ivied cottages in the lee of huge boulders in Rhode Island's back country, scent of sea and fragrance of fields, spell of the dark woods, and joy of the orchards and gardens at dawn. These, Randolph Carter, are your city, for they are yourself. New England bore you, and into your soul she poured a liquid loveliness which cannot die. This loveliness, molded, crystallized, and polished by years of memory and dreaming, is your dearest wonder of elusive sunsets. And to find that marble parapet with curious urns and carven rail, and descend at last those endless balustraded steps to the city of broad squares and prismatic fountains, you need only to turn back to the thoughts and visions of your wistful boyhood. Look, through that window shine the stars of eternal night. Even now they are shining above the scenes you have known and cherished, drinking of their charm that they may shine more lovely over the gardens of dream. There is Antares. He is winking at this moment over the roofs of Tremont Street, and you could see him from your window on Beacon Hill. Out beyond those stars yawn the gulfs from whence my mindless masters have sent me. Some day you too may traverse them, but if you are wise, you will beware such folly, for of those mortals who have been and returned, only one preserves a mind unshattered by the pounding, clawing horrors of the void. Terrors and blasphemies gnaw at one another from space, and there is more evil in the lesser ones than in the greater, even as you know from the deeds of those who sought to deliver you into my hands, whilst I myself harboured no wish to shatter you, and would indeed have helped you hither long ago had I not been elsewhere busy, and certain that you would yourself find the way. Shun then the outer hells, and stick to the calm, lovely things of your youth. Seek out your marvellous city and drive thence the recreant great ones, sending them back gently to those scenes which of their own youth and which wait uneasy for their return. Easier than the way of dim memory is the way I will prepare for you. See, there comes hither a monster Shantak, led by a slave who, for your peace of mind, had been best kept invisible. Mount and be ready there. Yogosh the Black will help you on the scaly horror. Steer for that brightest star just south of the zenith. It is Vega, and in 2 hours will be just above the terrace of your sunset city. Steer for it only till you hear a far-off singing in the high ether. Higher than that lurks madness. So, rein your Shantak when the first note lures. Look then back to earth, and you will see shining the deathless altar flame of Iredna from the sacred roof of a temple. That temple is your desiderate sunset city, so steer for it before you heed the singing and are lost. When you draw nigh the city, steer for the same high parapet whence of old you scanned the outspread glory, prodding the Shantak till he cry aloud. That cry the great ones will hear, and know as they sit on their perfumed terraces, and they will come upon them such a homesickness that all of your city's wonders will not console them for the absence of Kadath's grim castle and the pashent of eternal stars that crowns it. Then you must land amongst them with the Shantak, and let them see and touch that noisome and hippocephalic bird, meanwhile discoursing to them of unknown Kadath, which you will so lately have left, and telling them how its boundless halls are so lonely and unlighted, whereof old they used to leap and revel in supernal radiance. And the Shantak will talk to them in the manner of Shantaks, but it will have no powers of persuasion beyond the recalling of elder days. Over and over must you speak to the wandering great ones of their home and youth, till at last they will weep and ask to be shown the returning path they have forgotten. Thereat can you loose the waiting Shantak, sending him skyward with the homing cry of his kind, hearing which the great ones will prance and jump with antique mirth, and forthwith stride after the loathly bird in the fashion of gods, through the deep gulfs of heaven to Kadath's familiar towers and domes. Then will the marvelous Sunset City be yours to cherish and inhabit forever. And once more will earth's gods rule the dreams of men from their accustomed seat. Go now. The casement is open and the stars await outside. Already your Shantak wheezes and titters with impatience. Steer for Vega through the night, but turn when the singing sounds. Forget not this warning, lest horrors unthinkable suck you into the gulf of shrieking and ululant madness. Remember the other gods. They are great and mindless and terrible, and lurk in the outer voids. They are good gods to shun. Hayas, Shantanya, you're off. Send back earth's gods to their haunts on unknown Kadath, and pray to all space that you may never meet me in my 1,000 other forms. Farewell, Randolph Carter, and beware, for I am Nyarlathotep, the crawling chaos. And Randolph Carter, gasping and dizzy on his hideous Shantak, shot screamingly into space toward the cold blue glare of boreal Vega, looking but once behind him at the clustered and chaotic turrets of the onyx nightmare, wherein still glowed the lone lurid light of that window above the air and the clouds of earth's dreamland. Great Polypus horrors slid darkly past, and unseen bat wings beat multitudinous around him, but still he clung to the unwholesome mane of that loathly and hippocephalic scaled bird. The stars danced mockingly, almost shifting now and then to form pale signs of doom that one might wonder one had not seen and feared before. And ever the winds of ether howled a vague blackness and loneliness beyond the cosmos. Then through the glittering vault ahead there fell a hush of portent, and all the winds and horrors slunk away as night things slink away before the dawn. Trembling in waves that golden wisps of nebula made weirdly visible, there rose a timid hint of far-off melody, droning in faint chords that our own universe of stars knows not. And as that music grew, the Shantak raised its ears and plunged ahead, and Carter likewise bent to catch each lovely strain. It was a song, but not the song of any voice. Night and the spheres sang it, and it was old, when space and Nyarlathotep and the other gods were born. Faster flew the Shantak, and lower bent the rider, drunk with the marvels of strange gulfs, and whirling in the crystal coils of outer magic. Then came too late the warning of the evil one, the sardonic caution of the demon legate, who had bidden the seeker beware the madness of that song, only to taunt. Had Nyarlathotep marked out the way to safety, and the marvelous Sunset City, only to mock, had that black messenger revealed the secret of those truant gods, whose steps he could so easily lead back at will. For madness and the void's wild vengeance are Nyarlathotep's only gifts to the presumptuous, and frantic though the rider strove to turn his disgusting steed, that leering, tittering Shantak coursed on, impetuous and relentless, flapping its great slippery wings in malignant joy, and headed for those unhallowed pits whither no dreams reach, that last amorphous blight of nethermost confusion, where bubbles and blasphemes at infinity's center the mindless demon Sultan Azathoth, whose name no lips dare speak aloud. Unswerving and obedient to the foul-legged's orders, that hellish bird plunged onward through shoals of shapeless lurkers and caperers in darkness and vacuous herds of drifting entities that pawed and groped and pawed, the nameless larvae of the other gods that are like them, blind and without mind, and possessed of singular hungers and thirsts. Onward, unswerving and relentless, tittering hilariously to watch the chuckling and hysterics into which the siren song of night and the spheres had turned, that eldritch scaly monster bore its helpless rider, hurtling and shooting, cleaving the uttermost rim and spanning the uttermost abysses, leaving toward the stars and the realms of matter, and darting meteor-like through stark formlessness toward those inconceivable unlighted chambers beyond time, wherein black Azathoth gnaws, shapeless and ravenous, amidst the muffled, maddening beat of vile drums and the thin, monotonous whine of accursed flutes. Onward, onward, through the screaming, cackling, and blackly populous gulfs, and then, from some dim, blessed distance, there came an image and a thought to Randolph Carter, the doomed. Too well had Nyarlathotep planned his mocking and his tantalizing, for he had bought that which no gusts of icy terror could quite efface. Home, New England, Beacon Hill, the waking world. For you know that your golden marble city of wonder is only the sum of what you have seen and loved in youth. The glory of Boston's hillside roofs and western windows aflame with sunset, of the flower-fragrant common and the great dome on the hill, and the tangle of gables and chimneys in the violet valley where the many-bridged Charles flows drowsily. This loveliness, molded, crystallized, and polished by years of memory and dreaming, is your terraced wonder of elusive sunsets. And to find that marble parapet with curious urns in carven realm, and descend at last those endless balustraded steps to the city of broad squares and prismatic fountains, you need only to turn back to the thoughts and visions of your wistful boyhood. Onward and onward, dizzily onward, to ultimate doom through the blackness, where sightless feelers pawed and slimy snouts jostled and nameless things tittered and tittered and tittered. But the image and the thought had come, and Randolph Carter knew clearly that he was dreaming, and only dreaming, and that somewhere in the background the world of waking and the city of his infancy still lay. Words came again. You need only turn back to the thoughts and visions of your wistful boyhood. Turn, turn, blackness on every side. But Randolph Carter could turn. Thick through the rushing nightmare that clutched his senses, Randolph Carter could turn and move. He could move, and if he chose, he could leap off the evil shantak that bore him hurtingly doomward at the orders of Nyarlathotep. He could leap off and dare those depths of night that yawned interminably down, those depths of fears whose terrors yet could not exceed the nameless doom that lurked waiting at chaos's core. He could turn and move and leap. He could, he would. Off that vast hippocephalic abomination leaped the doomed and desperate dreamer. And down, through endless voids of sentient blackness he fell. Eons reeled, universes died and were born again, stars became nebulae, and nebulae became stars, and still Randolph Carter fell through those endless voids of sentient blackness. Then, in the slow creeping course of eternity, the utmost cycle of the cosmos churned itself into another futile completion, and all things became again as they were unreckoned kalpas before. Matter and light were born anew, as space once had known them, and comets, suns, and worlds sprang flaming into life, though nothing survived to tell what they had been and gone, always and always, back to no first beginning. And there was a firmament again, and a wind, and a glare of purple light in the eyes of the falling dreamer. There were gods and presences and wills, beauty and evil, and the shrieking of noxious night robbed of its prey. For through the unknown ultimate cycle had lived a thought and a vision of a dreamer's boyhood. Now there were remade a waking world and an old cherished city to body and to justify these things. Out of the void, Singak, the violet gas, had pointed the way, and archaic Nodens were bellowing his guidance from unhinted deeps. Stars swelled to dawns, and dawns burst into fountains of gold, carmine, and purple, and still the dreamer fell. Cries rent the ether as ribbons of light beat back the fiends from outside, and hoary Nodens raised a howl of triumph when Nyarlathotep, close on his quarry, stopped, baffled by a glare that seared his formless hunting horrors to grey dust. Randolph Carter had indeed descended at last the wide memorial flights to his marvelous city, for he was come again to the fair New England world that had wrought him. So to the organ chords of morning's myriad whistles and the dawn's blaze thrown, dazzling through purple panes by the great gold dome of the State House on the hill, Randolph Carter leaped shoutingly awake within his Boston room. Birds sang in hidden gardens, and the perfume of trellised vines came wistful from arbors his grandfather had reared. Beauty and light glowed from the classic mantel and carven cornice and walls grotesquely figured, while a sleek black cat rose yawning from hearthside. Sleep that his master's start and shriek had disturbed, and vast infinities away past the gate of deeper slumber, and the enchanted wood, and the garden lands, and the Serenarian sea, and the twilight reaches of Inganok, the crawling chaos Nyarlathotep strode brooding into the onyx castle atop unknown Kadath in the cold waste, and taunted insolently the mild gods of earth, whom he had snatched abruptly from their scented revels in the marvelous Sunset City.